Well, thank you so much for coming out. It's been a joy to be up here in Pennsylvania doing my seminar on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. How many of this is the first session you've been to? How many came to one of the previous ones? And how many do not understand the question so far? All right. Well, good. My name's Kent Hovind, has been for quite a while. I was a high school science teacher 15 years, and now I've been in evangelism 10 years, and I travel and speak on creation, evolution, and dinosaurs. In the last session, we talked about how the evolution theory became popular in the mid-1800s and how they developed the geologic column. And this timeline I've got up here will help illustrate some of these points. About 1830, the geologic column was invented. Who can tell me where is the only place in the world you can find the geologic column? Who remembers that from last night? Yes, sir. In the textbooks. And what grade are you in? Fourth grade. All right, very good. He listened last night. So in 1830, early 1800s, people began rejecting the Bible for a variety of reasons. The Industrial Revolution was going on. There were lots of countries having revolutions to get rid of their king, the anti-monarchy age. It was an age of prosperity and new inventions, and people thought the Bible kind of stood in the way for their lifestyle. And so the geologic column was invented, and that led to Charles Darwin. And in this session tonight, I want to show you the influence that the evolution theory has had from the mid-1800s, the influence that theory has had on the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, the New World Order, Naziism. Folks, it all ties together. It's a basic rejection of God. Some people don't want God telling them what to do. I'm going to give you 14 main points we're going to cover tonight as quick as we can. God created the world, number one. Number two, Satan became proud of his beauty or whatever reason, and he thought man ought to worship him. Number three, Satan rebelled against God, but he failed. And he was cursed. His rebellion was, he lost. And so God said he would take the seed of the woman someday to bruise his head. And so Satan deceived and tried to destroy every seed of the woman ever since. He deceived Eve. He lied to her. And there's been a war going on now for 6,000 years since this fall in the Garden of Eden when Satan rebelled against God. And he's using the same tactics now that he used on Eve in the Garden of Eden. Three things he did. First, he tried to raise doubts. Then he tried to deny what God had said, called him a liar. And then he tried to deify mankind. Eve, you can be like God. You get to be, and that's what the evolution theory is all about. Then over the years, he's used all sorts of different people to try to promote his theory and to accomplish his goals of destroying humanity. And that's where some of these isms come in, like Nazism and communism and socialism and the New World Order, coming soon to a city near you. And Satan promises to give all the kingdoms of the world if you fall down and worship him. He's a liar. There have been a lot of groups who are working with the devil. Many of them don't even know they're working with the devil, but they're trying to accomplish his goal of first a new world order and then no population left. Eliminate mankind. So Satan put it into the hearts and minds of some of these super rich zillionaires that it's their duty to rule the world, and they really should reduce the world population. What they don't realize is when they get done doing the devil's work for him, he's going to get rid of them also. That's what the communists have always done. They get a bunch of revolutionaries to go in and destroy a country, and then they execute the revolutionaries. After all, you can't trust them, you know. And tribulation is coming soon, folks. The world's going to have a tribulation like it's never seen before. It's going to be really bad coming up soon. And we might see tribulation. See, tribulation is when the world persecutes us. We're even told we shall see tribulation in this world, but we will not see the wrath of God. Wrath is when God goes after the world. The world's going to come after us, and they have been all along, and they're persecuting Christians all over the world right now. And we might have to see some of that, but we won't see God's wrath. And number 14, God wins in the end. See, I read the last chapter. We win. So in light of all this, what should we do? Well, we should realize God's in control and obey his orders. That's the basic message tonight in a nutshell. Now, let's put some of the pieces together. Put a little meat on these bones here. God created the world. He owns this place. The Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. But sometime within the first 100 years or so, Lucifer got kind of proud and decided, you know, these people ought to be worshiping me. We know Lucifer did not fall from heaven until after the seven-day creation was done, because in Genesis 1:31, God looked at everything and said it was very good. So Satan hadn't fallen yet. And we know, according to Ezekiel 28, Lucifer was in Eden until iniquity was found in him. And the Garden of Eden wasn't made till day 6. So sometime before Cain and Abel were born, which would have been about the first 100 years, because Seth was born at 130 years of age. I mean, Adam and Eve were 130. So we assume that probably within the first 100 years, Satan got proud. And it tells about it in the book of Isaiah chapter 14. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. See, the devil wants to be God. And he can't be God, of course, so he's all upset about that. And he's trying to destroy everything God ever made to make God look like a failure. He wants to destroy humanity. And I want to show you how the evolution theory is one of his key players, at least in this century. One of Satan's key players to help destroy humanity. The Bible says in Isaiah 14, Yet shalt thou be brought down to the hell, to the pit, to the sides of the pit. Satan loses in the end. God's not nervous about the whole thing. Now, we're in the middle of the war right now, but God already knows how it's going to end, and so do we if you read our Bible, and so we don't need to be nervous. I think we do need to be busy. Now's the time to get to work. Someday the people are going to look at Satan, look at him narrowly and say, is this the man that made the earth to tremble and did shake the kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof and opened not the house of his prisoners? Is this the guy that did all that? We're going to be amazed how puny Satan is when we get to see him cast into hell. Genesis chapter 3. The Lord said unto the serpent, Satan, because thou hast done this thing, cursed art thou above all cattle. The Lord put a curse on Satan, and he told him in verse 15, someday the seed of the woman will bruise your head. You shall bruise his heel, and he shall bruise your head. And when Satan got Jesus crucified on the cross, that was a bruise in the heel. A bruise in the heel is painful, but it's not fatal. Jesus rose from the dead. And now someday he's going to mash the devil's head. Now that's fatal. I can't wait for that day to happen. There's been a war going on, folks, for a long time. Satan decided he wants to destroy every seed of the woman, trying to save his own hide. And this battle's been going on for a long time. So the serpent said to the woman, Yea, hath God said? Oh, question God's word. Then he said, Ye shall not surely die. Deny God's word. And then he said, Ye shall be as gods. Deify mankind. And those same three tactics he's going to use on you today. Doubt, denial, and deification of man. Adolf Hitler said, if you tell a lie long enough and loud enough and often enough, the people will believe it. He said they're more likely to believe a big lie than a small one, too. Hey, if you're going to tell somebody things are going to happen to you that are good, you might as well tell them, hey, someday you're going to be a god. Wow, that's a big lie. They'll believe a big lie. And he's using those same three lies today. Raise doubts, deny God's word, and deify mankind, and you can count on it. He's using this lie to lead millions to hell. Ye shall be as gods. Many religions in the world have fallen for that. We cover that in other parts of this series. Satan started this war about 6,000 years ago. It's been a long war going on. He's fighting against God. He wants you to believe that someday you get to be a god. And see, what you believe, it's called your philosophy, that determines your behavior. Belief determines behavior. If you believe you are God, well, then you're going to want everybody to bow down and worship you. And Satan wants to get you to believe you're a God. The Bible warned us to beware lest any man spoil you through philosophy and vain deceit, after the tradition of men, after the rudiments of the world, and not after Christ. Philosophy comes from two Greek words, phileo, meaning love of, and sophi, meaning man's wisdom. The word sophomore comes from two words, soph, meaning wisdom, or very wise, and more, where we get our word moron. A sophomore is a wise fool. That's the age where they think they know it all. Some never do grow out of that stage. But your philosophy is extremely important. Evolution is not a science, it's a philosophy. It's a way of thinking. It's a way of looking at the world. There's no science to back it up, that's for sure. So, Satan has used lots of different people to destroy the world. Nazism, communism, socialism, Marxism, racism, New World Order. And we're going to get into some of those here. Racism. Charlie Darwin wrote a book in 1859. Darwin was influenced very strongly by some different people, Malthus and Lyell and some other people. Darwin wrote this book in 1859. I've got it right here on the platform. Now, the theory of evolution really came a long time before that. It was been around, but Darwin actually plagiarized an awful lot of stuff from his grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, who came up with a lot of the theory way before Darwin did, Charlie did. But this book justified racism. The title of the book says, The Origin of Species. Now there's a whole lot more to the title, as we'll see in a minute. Now what is a species? There never has been a good definition given of the word species. People look at these different monkeys and say, wow, they're all different species. Well, okay, maybe so. But they're the same kind of animal. Same kind. See, the Bible says they bring forth after their kind. Origin of species was never addressed in this book. Even though that's the title, he never did talk about the origin of species. And this author said, both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. They still don't know how these animals change from one kind to another. Nobody has a clue. This textbook, a Heath biology textbook, tells the kids a little bit more of the title. It says, boys and girls, in 1859, Darwin wrote a book titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. Now they're giving them just a little bit more of the title. Now see, back in those days, they had long titles on their books. Here's the entire title. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Favored races. Ooh, Charlie, that's not politically correct. Well, back in 1859 it was. Almost everybody was a racist. 1859, you could buy and sell slaves. Darwin said in this book right here, 243, thus from the war of nature, from famine, from death, the most exalted object which we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of higher animals, directly follows. In other words, death and suffering is good? Oh yeah, that's his philosophy. Charlie was a strange guy. He thought natives were just advanced animals. Of course, in 1859, Negroes were for sale. Slavery was here in America, folks. They bought them and sold them like cows. And you got to understand, Darwin's book hit the market at just the right time to justify what was already happening. I want you to look at the attitude of some of these people. This is Henry Fairfield Osborn, major evolutionist. He was going to testify in the Scopes monkey trial against the creation movement. He was considered a key witness for evolution. He said the standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of the 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. How long would a professor keep his job today if he said that? How about Thomas Huxley, who went around pushing Darwin all over the place? Huxley said, no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior, of the white man. How long would that professor keep his job? Well, see, in those days, they used to pack slaves onto ships. 10 to 20% would die en route. They just crammed them on there. Slavery, folks, is a horrible thing. But the only way to justify slavery is evolution. You have to make people think that one race is superior. It doesn't work otherwise. These two folks had an interesting job. They started looking for missing links. They thought, you know, between the white man and the apes, there ought to be some missing links if we evolved that way. And so they began looking for missing links. They went to Australia, and they found that the Aborigines who lived down there looked like a perfect missing link because their jawbones were bigger than ours. Well, the reason their jawbones are bigger is the Aborigines don't use a toolbox. They wander around and they don't carry any tools with them, and they use their jaws as a vise or pliers. You want to crack something open, you stick it in your mouth, crack it open. And because they're constantly using their jaw muscles more than we are, their jaw muscles get lots bigger. And because their muscles get bigger, it makes the bones get bigger. Any bodybuilder knows the more you build the muscles, the bigger the bones get, eventually. I mean, take a look. It's obvious, right? So the Aborigines have bigger jaws because of their lifestyle, not because of evolution. But they began dragging these Aborigines in, enslaving them, killing them, sending them off for museum samples. A New South Wales missionary was the horrified witness to the slaughter by mounted police of a group of dozens of Aboriginal men, women, and children. 45 heads were then boiled down, and the best 10 skulls packed off for overseas. You know, they rounded up the Aborigines and shot them just to get their skulls to put in a museum. You know where a whole bunch of them are? Not far from here. The Smithsonian has 33,000 of them in the basement right now. The Smithsonian has been very involved in covering up many major discoveries, like the giant skeletons that are found. Skeletons 8, 9, 10, 11 feet tall. The Smithsonian comes in to investigate them, and they kind of disappear, get locked up someplace and never seen again. See, they believe in evolution, and they want you to think we started off like a chimpanzee and we're getting bigger and better and stronger and smarter. And the idea that man used to be bigger and smarter than today doesn't go the way they want people to believe. Got a great book on that. You can read about Far Out Adventures, a huge book on the finds that have been kind of mysteriously eliminated, disappeared. But they've got skeletons in their closet they'd like to hide, I'm sure. Now, that doesn't mean everybody that works there is bad. I'm sure there's a lot of good people that work there. But somebody has got an axe to grind at the Smithsonian. Oda Benga was taken away from his family. He had a wife and 2 kids. He was put in a cage with chimpanzees as part of an evolution display. He went insane and killed himself. St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 had a display of pygmies to show how they hadn't evolved as far as the white man. That was in 1904, folks. Charles Darwin thought women were inferior. He said, "A married man is a poor slave, worse than a Negro." Now let me ask you a question. If a professor said that today, how long would he keep his job? Or his life? And yet they've got schools all over this county that are praising Darwin for being such a great scientist. He was a racist and a woman hater. He finally married his first cousin, Emma Wedgwood. Nobody else would have him. Darwin said the chief distinction in the intellectual powers of the 2 sexes is shown by man's attaining to a higher eminence in whatever he takes up than the woman. Whether requiring deep thought, reason, or imagination, or merely the use of senses and hands, the average of mental power of man must be above that of woman. A nice guy, huh? Thus, man has ultimately become superior to woman, poetry, strength, voice, etc. Darwin had a little ego problem, I think. But this attitude rubbed off on all sorts of folks. It rubbed off on Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt thought the Indians were an inferior species. See, once you start thinking that different colors of people are superior to others, there's no telling where that's going to lead. Roosevelt said, "I wish very much the wrong people could be prevented entirely from breeding." Who's the wrong people, Teddy? Well, Teddy thought the immigrants from Europe, Scotland, Ireland, and the Orient were a threat to American society. How many of you have ancestors from one of those places? Nearly everybody in the room, right? See, you're inferior, according to him. In 1871, Congress scrapped all treaties with the Indians. Why did they do that? Well, you see, our congressmen, many of them believed in evolution, or at least they were racist, who thought that one species was superior to another, and they thought the Indians were an inferior species, and really it's best if the white man comes in and takes over their territory. That was the thinking, folks. You ought to read about the Trail of Tears and see how the racism played into that. Now, that started way before Darwin came. But they were persecuting the Indians. First, you got to vilify them. You call them savages in the newspaper. You know, call them savages. Make sure everybody thinks they're horrible. And then when you go in there and you're mean to them, nobody gets upset about it. See, this evolution philosophy really has played a big part in all through history. It's also the foundation for communism and Nazism and socialism. The whole idea is that man can become a god. He can have the power over other people. So man, in his attempt to Satan, in his attempt to get a new world order, has used all sorts of people. He uses man's natural lust for power, for riches, for beauty, and for knowledge. He knows these things people have. Lucifer had the same problem in Ezekiel chapter 28. His heart was lifted up because of his riches and because of his beauty. The Bible talks about the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Those things will destroy you. The Bible says the love of money is the root of all evil. See, when people get this lust for money, they've got money, they want more. Nothing wrong with money. But when it becomes your master, boy, it's all downhill from there. Love of money, root of all evil. That's what happened to John D. Rockefeller. You ought to read some of the books I've got in my back of my seminar notebook in the recommended reading about Rockefeller. When you understand how Rockefeller is tied in with the pharmaceutical industry, the drug industry, the dental industry, it'll make you just shake your head and say, wow, the love of money is the root of all evil. Well, I don't want to go off on too many rabbit trails here, but call me sometime. I'll just explain all kinds of things, like why we have fluoride in our toothpaste, and it's dangerous and shouldn't be there. And why we have drugs instead of nutrition to try to get people healthy. You get into Carnegie. Carnegie started a foundation purposely to keep creation out of the schools. Eugenia Scott is the president today of the foundation started by Carnegie. It's called the National Center for Science Education. Sounds real nice, doesn't it? They send out pamphlets to schools and teachers and principals all over America telling them, don't let creation come into your schools. It's okay to teach creation in your schools, folks. You got nothing to worry about. But all through history, there's been attempts at a new world order, a one-world government. Communism and humanism tie into this very strongly. Communism is based on the idea that man is the ultimate authority. There is no God. So man becomes God. The communist rules for revolution were accidentally discovered in 1919. I think a guy was shot, a spy was shot, and these were found in his pocket, I believe is the way the story went. But these are the communist rules for revolution. Here's how they intend to take over the world. Number one, corrupt the young. Get them away from religion. Number two, break down the old moral virtues. Number three, encourage civil disorders and a soft government attitude toward crime. Have you noticed how many criminals get off with light sentences these days? Where'd they get this idea of 3 strikes and you're out? Well, he's only murdered 2 people. Yeah. 1 strike and you're out. For certain crimes, man, we have lost our biblical basis of taking care of prisoners and taking care of, punishment of evildoers. We've got a long ways away from what the Bible says, folks. They're encouraging a soft government attitude toward crime. And then divide the people into hostile groups. Get the people's minds off their government. Focus their attention on athletics. I wonder how many of you have your attention focused on athletics instead of government. I wonder how many of you in this room know more about sports than you do about government. Working, isn't it? Back in 1896, there were 311 athletes in the Olympics. Nobody cared. 1996, 100 years later, there were 13,000. Somebody ought to figure out how much money is spent on sports. That would include all phases, the transportation to go see the game, the transportation for the team to get there, the money to build the buildings for them to play the games in. Talk about environmental impact. It's unreal, folks, how much money goes into this. Number 6, get control of all media, like CNN, the Communist News Network. Control the media. See, it's very important if you're going to control a country, you have to control the media so you can give them what you want them to learn. You can keep them distracted. David Rockefeller spoke at a meeting of the Bilderbergers, one of these Illuminati-type meetings. He voiced his praise of the controlled U.S. media for keeping their oath not to divulge the globalist plans to the public. Speaking to his fellow conspirators in 1991, Rockefeller said, "We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, the New Time magazine, and other great publications, whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. He went on to explain, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years, but the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries." What he's trying to say here, folks, is the world would be much better off with the super smart bankers in charge. He's talking about himself. See, he already has most of the money. He would like all of it. And the rich folks that really control our world, that's the real secret government, is the super rich. There's a great video you ought to get on that called The Fourth Reich of the Rich by Des Griffin, I believe. Or you can get the one, oh, there's several good things on that. Call me out in my office, I'll get some stuff. Let me give you some quotes here, though, from major news people, like Richard Cohen, who said, "We are going to impose our agenda on the coverage by dealing with the issues and subjects we choose to deal with." CBS News president said, "Our job is to give people not what they want, but what we decide they ought to have." So you can count on it. If something is real big in the news, like O.J. Simpson for 13 months, they're trying to distract you from something that's really happening. Whatever is big in the news is not what's important. It's a distraction. It's a smokescreen. They're hiding something else. Like when they tried to impeach Bill Clinton for Monica Lewinsky, that was a smokescreen. They should have tried to impeach Bill Clinton for Chinagate. They should have gone after him for treason, not for a sexual affair with Lewinsky. And I don't know how our senators got figured out the idea that it's their job to decide whether he should be removed from office or not. It looks to me like the Constitution says the House of Representatives decides if he should be impeached, and they decided he was. And then the Senate has a trial to see if he's guilty of what they said. Not should he be removed from office, but was he guilty? Folks, we got a problem in our country. Gone a long ways from the Constitution. Herman Dismore said, "The New York Times is deliberately pitched to the liberal socialist point of view. News reporters are certainly liberal," Walter Cronkite said. "News media in general are liberals," Barbara Walters said. Number 7, destroy people's faith in their leaders. These are the communist rules for revolution. Number 8, cause the registration of all firearms. Why would you want to register all the firearms? Every dictator wants to control who has the guns. That way he can control who can resist. Lenin said, one person with a gun can control 100 people without one. Watch TV when they got one guy with a gun come into the bank and tells everybody, lay down on the floor. One guy's got the gun, everybody lays on the floor, right? See, the communist people know this. The person with the gun is in control. Everybody else is in fear. Every dictator, Lenin, Stalin, Hitler, everyone has called for gun control because they want to have the power. It goes back to Satan's lie, ye shall be as God. And our founding fathers gave us the Second Amendment, Article 2. They were pretty smart guys. They said, you know, folks, if the government fears the people, we can have freedom. But if the people ever fear their government, now you have tyranny. And so they gave the Second Amendment as a last-ditch, as a last stop or shield of defense against the government. What if the government goes bad? See, they broke it up into 3 powerful groups. Senate, or the House of Representatives and Senate, which is the, we've got the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. Each one has checks and balances over the other. But our founding fathers said, just in case the whole thing goes bad, every citizen should be allowed to have a firearm. Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms. Now this Brady bill that was passed to take away machine guns is terrible, folks. That's unconstitutional law. Ought to be repealed. You say, Brother Hovind, you don't need a machine gun to go duck hunting. Well, you would get a lot of ducks. But you don't understand, folks. The purpose of the Second Amendment is not so you can go duck hunting. The purpose of the Second Amendment is so you can defend yourself against your own government. Just in case. Now, I believe in gun control. I really do. Gun control is being able to hold it steady and hit the intended target. That's gun control. Adolf Hitler said, this year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation had full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient. Boy, were they. And the world will follow our lead into the future. Hitler was a big advocate of gun control. They went around and made sure every gun was registered so they knew who had the guns. And then it's a simple matter. Surround the block, March through. Mr. Jones, I understand you have a gun. We'd like it, please. That's what they do, folks. Janet Reno said, gun registration is not enough. Waiting periods are only a step. Registration is only a step. The prohibition of private firearms is the goal. Well, she got that idea from Karl Marx. She has a Marxist philosophy, not a biblical or a Christian or a constitutional philosophy. That's a Marxist philosophy, a way of thinking. Howard Metzenbaum, senator from Ohio, said, what good does it do to ban some guns? All guns should be banned. Well, guess where Metzenbaum got that philosophy? From communism. Sarah Brady, from the Brady Bill, said our task of creating a totally socialist America can only succeed when those who would resist have been totally disarmed. Interesting. Bill Clinton said, every community in the country could then start doing major weapons sweeps and destroying the weapons, not selling them. See, Bill Clinton has a Marxist philosophy. He was influenced by Karl Marx. Lots of folks have been influenced by that philosophy. See, the communists will say they want peace, but their definition of peace is different than ours. Their definition is the absence of resistance. When everybody stops fighting against communism, we will have peace. We would like a piece of Vietnam, a piece of Korea, a piece of China, a piece of Afghanistan. They want all the pieces, folks. That's what they really want. Karl Marx, the father of communism, tried to dedicate his book to Charles Darwin. On the title page he wrote, dedicated to Charles Darwin from a sincere admirer, Karl Marx. Karl Marx knew his theory of communism would not succeed without evolution. The two go hand in glove. They fit together great. Karl Marx referred to evolution in his speeches over and over and over. Just read anything Karl Marx wrote. You'll see evolution all through there. Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, was a strong believer in evolution. He killed between 60 and 100 million of his own people. I spoke in the Ukraine. Who's the family here from the Ukraine? Wasn't there one here? Last night there was a family. Back there, okay? I spoke in the Ukraine. You know, 10 million people were killed by Stalin in the Ukraine. He starved them. That's the breadbasket of Russia. They raised all the crops. A couple days before harvest time, the Soviet troops came in, harvested all the crops, and hauled them out. Left everybody there to starve. Interesting. Stalin went to a Christian school, though, when he was a kid. While he went to a Christian school, Stalin read this book. When he read this book, he became an atheist. That's the book that changed his life forever. Joseph Stalin said, well, if the strongest survive, then I'm going to be the strongest. That's what Darwin taught. So in World War II, when Germany hit Poland from one side and Russia hit them from the other side, the Polish army collapsed in a heap after 5 days of ferocious resistance. But they were just outnumbered, outgunned. It was futile to resist. They ended up surrendering. So they had all these officers that they captured. They asked Joseph Stalin, what should we do with the Polish officers we captured? Stalin said, execute them. Now, the Russians denied that for a long time, but they finally admitted it in 1992. 1992, they admitted, yep, we ordered the execution. They took 14,700 Polish officers, put hoods over their heads, tied their hands behind their back, and shot them in the back of the head. One massacre at one forest, the Katyn forest. You say 14,000 officers, they killed them? Mm-hmm. You say, Brother Hovind, that's not nice. Well, duh. But don't you understand, if a person believes in evolution, there is no God to answer to. So it doesn't matter what's nice, it matters what succeeds. The ends do justify the means. And treaties are only a way of getting ahead. And the dumbest thing our congressmen and senators do is to make treaties with the Soviets. Should never do that. You say, well, Brother Hovind, don't you think we ought to, you know, they're starving, shouldn't we give them some bread? Well, now hold on just a minute. If they're starving, why have they increased their capacity to produce weapons? They've increased their production of weapons 6 times what it was just 10 years ago. One of our leaders asked one of their leaders, said, why are you guys producing so many tanks and missiles and bombs and Soviet submarines and all? Why are you guys Why are you doing all this military stuff? He said, well, we don't want our people to be unemployed. Oh, that's a good answer, yeah. And if you think things have changed in the Soviet Union, boy, have you been brainwashed. Communism is going to come back with a vengeance, folks. You mark my words. Soviet Union did not collapse. They didn't take the Berlin Wall down so we could get in. They took it down because it's unnecessary. Communism's already all over the place. Don't need that wall anymore. Pol Pot, the dictator of the communist Cambodia, he killed 1/3 of his entire population. Executed them. We've got people in Pensacola, Florida. They are the only survivor of their family. I met a guy the other day at the photography shop. Everybody in his family, mother, father, aunts, uncles, brothers, sisters, everybody was murdered by Pol Pot. He's the only survivor. Guinness Book of World Records lists him as the greatest genocide. Can you imagine killing from 1/3 to 1/2 of your entire population? Peter Singer said, Christianity is our foe. If animal rights is to succeed, we must destroy the Judeo-Christian religious tradition. Nice guy, Peter. Mao Zedong, the communist dictator for China, with American help, by the way, the American capitalists financed the takeover of China to make sure that communists took over China. Boy, what a long, bloody, sad story there. Somebody's going to answer to God for that one. But when the communists took over China, Mao Zedong said Darwin and Huxley were two of his favorite authors. When Mao Zedong took over China, he listed Darwin and Huxley as his favorite authors, and he began killing Christians. Christians don't get along too good in communist countries. They executed 15,000 a month. Here we got whole chapters teaching this stuff in our country, and you guys are paying to have it taught in your schools. We're raising the next generation of humanists, socialists, and, if they get violent, communists. Kids have to learn this kind of stuff. Life arose from non-living matter present on early Earth. That's not a scientific fact. That's a fairy tale. But that's the stuff they're tested on. This author said, creationism should be discriminated against. No advocate of such propaganda should be trusted to teach science classes. If a teacher starts teaching creation in their public school, even though legally they can, they run the risk of losing their job. Ask anyone that teaches in a public school, and they'll tell you they fear talking about the Bible or creation for fear they might lose their job. There's always that, look over my shoulder kind of thing, like who's going to catch me? There's no law that says you can't, but they know there will be persecution. An Iowa professor said you should fail any student, no matter what the grades are, if you find out he's a creationist. Furthermore, the department should have the right to retract the grades and possibly his degree if he becomes a creationist later. Boy, they're real excited about doing what's right, aren't they? Our founding fathers said we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are endowed by their Creator. See, the reason this evolution ties in so much with a new world order, if there's a Creator, then we get our rights from the Creator. And our founding fathers who started this country believed that rights come from God. They don't come from the government, they come from God. And there's some people out there who want you to get their permission to do everything. That's socialism, not Christianity. See, there's two philosophies of government. Under evolution thinking philosophy, rights come from the government. That's called a democracy. Democracies are dangerous forms of government. They always become dictatorships. Democracies are dangerous and deadly. Wouldn't trust a democracy for a second. Because they decide right and wrong based upon majority opinion. I get pretty worried when I see our news media putting up all these polls, deciding what's right and wrong based upon a poll. Oh, no, you better decide right and wrong based upon the law. Our leaders today are governing, which way's the wind blowing? We need some statesmen that'll stand up and say, I'm going to do what's right because this is what the law says. There's a different philosophy of government based upon creation thinking, which says laws come from the Creator, and rights are unalienable. You can't put a lien against them. That's called a republic, where the law is supreme. Mr. Yefremov, His daughter married Bill, who works for me, and his other son, David, works for me. He has 5 children. Mr. Yefimov came to my house. He lives a couple blocks away. He's from Ukraine. He came to my house about a year ago, and he set his high school diploma on my table. He said, "Mr. Hovind, this is my high school diploma." I thought, yeah, you got 5 kids, 2 in college. What are you handing me your high school diploma for? He said, "Brother Hovind, you don't understand. I just got it in the mail." I said, "Okay." He said, "You don't understand." He said, "I was raised in the Ukraine, in Soviet Union." He said, "My high school graduation was coming up. I had very good grades." He showed me his report card. He said, "I had very good grades, but we had to take a test to graduate from Soviet Union high school. One of the questions on the test said, 'Do you believe in evolution?' I said, 'No.' And they refused to let me graduate. They just sent me the diploma 35 years later. Long, interesting story of why they sent him the diploma, too. You can call me sometime, we'll talk about that. That was great. But these humanists have decided to use the school system to spread their humanism and communism. Every public school is supposed to be a school of humanism. They know the Sunday school cannot compete just an hour a week. They've got all the kids for 6 hours a week, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Do humanists believe in a supreme being? Oh yes, that supreme being is man. That's what the humanists believe. They say the battle for mankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith that will replace the rotting corpse of Christianity. Folks, we are the enemy as far as the humanists are concerned. Communism is the goal. That's what the founding father of the ACLU said, American Communist Lawyers Union. Well, Karl Marx, the father of communism, Karl Marx wrote a beautiful paper when he was 17 years old telling how much he loved the Lord. Then he went off to college. I wonder how many kids have gone from Christian homes to secular schools and had their faith destroyed. How many of you have ever heard of somebody like that? Went from a Christian home to a secular school? James Dobson, I believe it was, said that 70% of the kids that go to secular schools lose their faith in the Bible. That's tragic. Karl Marx later said, "My objective in life is to dethrone God and destroy capitalism." Karl Marx based his philosophy of communism on evolution. He was kind of a loser as a family man. He had 6 children. 3 of them died of starvation while they were infants. 2 of them committed suicide. When Karl Marx died, only 6 people came to his funeral. He was a loser. But boy, did he influence the world forever. Today, about 1/3 of the world is under his teaching. Communist Manifesto. Remember I told you this session was going to be politically incorrect. Now get ready. People start walking out any time on this one. Karl Marx developed the Communist Manifesto. If you want to control a country, if you want communism, these are 10 steps you must take. Number 1, abolish private property. Karl Marx thought this up. And folks, this is the real purpose behind the environmental movement. They're not trying to save the environment, they're trying to abolish private property. They want you to have to get their permission to cut down your tree on your property. Our founding fathers knew about property rights because they were thoroughly indoctrinated with the Bible. The Bible talks a lot about property. Matter of fact, they had a system in the book of Leviticus. Every 50th year was called the year of Jubilee. You got your property back. You couldn't permanently lose your property. If you were lazy or got in trouble or were a dud of a businessman or something, you might lose your property for a few years, but your family would get it back. The Bible talks about everybody sitting under his own vine, his own fig tree. Ownership of property is essential to freedom. And our founding fathers made a mistake. They made a few minor mistakes, but one of them was they had a slogan they used called life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. What on earth is that? Define that for me, please. The real slogan was life, liberty, and property. The right to own your own property. Extremely important for freedom. Peter Burrell, president of the National Audubon Society, said, "We reject the idea of private property." Now, where would a fellow get an idea like that? He's been reading from Karl Marx. Karl Marx's second plank was a heavy, progressive income tax. Reagan said that in a speech one time. The taxation system in America is based on Karl Marx's idea. Interesting. By the way, you might want to read my website on that. We got some interesting articles. An awful lot of people pay that and don't have to. Many people, it's voluntary for a lot of folks. That statement gets me in trouble all the time. Get the website, goodbiz.com. Number 3, abolish the rights of inheritance. Number 4, confiscate property rights. Number 5, you got to have a central bank. This is, if you want communism to succeed, you must have a central bank. And boy, we've got it here in America. We have what are called Federal Reserve notes. It's not a dollar. It's a Federal Reserve note. And it's not federal. The government doesn't own these. Our government rents these for $1 plus interest off of the Federal Reserve. People say, man, we got a national debt of like 10 or 15 trillion dollars. Who do we owe that money to? We owe it to the rich bankers. See, they are loaning us our own currency. Our government pays to print this for about 3 cents. Then they give it to the Federal Reserve, and they rent it back to the government for $1 plus interest. Figure out a deal like that. Talk about a money-making scheme. And you ought to read about the Federal Reserve and how the Rockefellers are tied in. Get this book from Theo Maves up in Brookfield, Wisconsin, and read about the Rockefeller and the Federal Reserve. You know, Khrushchev boasted he got all of his secrets from Rockefeller's organization that he started called the CIA. You ever heard of the CIA? Rockefeller dominates that. Did you know the CIA is responsible for bringing drugs into America? It's just so that it will create a drug problem. So they have an excuse for a bigger police force. Because they need the bigger police force to enforce the New World Order. It's all step-by-step part of the plan, folks. The Bible talks about people borrowing money on the king's tribute and putting our children into bondage. That's what we've done with the Federal Reserve. We've got our kids and grandkids a debt they will never pay off. Guaranteed to be slaves forever. Number 6, government ownership of communication and transportation. Government ownership of factories and agriculture. Government control of labor. Corporate farms, regional planning. Free education for all. Did you know the free public school system is one of Karl Marx's brainchilds? See, back in the mid-1800s, almost everybody went to private schools. And America was doing great. Nearly everybody could read. And I would like to see anybody in this room go pick up an 8th grade reader, excuse me, go pick up an 8th grade reader from the public schools or from the private schools of 1830. Hardly anybody in this room would be able to read it and comprehend what it says. Those kids in 8th grade back then are reading at a college level. And anybody that's taught high school or college for a while will tell you the kids today are reading and writing and thinking at about a 5th or 6th grade level. How many know what I'm talking about? How about this for a quote? Every child who enters school at age 5 is mentally ill because he comes to school with allegiance toward elected officials, founding fathers, institutions, government, patriotism, nationalism, sovereignty. All these prove the child is sick because the well individual is one who has rejected all those things and is what I call the true international child of the future. That guy's teaching at Harvard University? Any child who believes in God is mentally ill. That's a social studies textbook used in public schools. That's what you're paying to have the kids taught in social studies. Be sure to read this book, The Fourth Reich of the Rich by Des Griffin. You can see how Rockefeller used his millions to promote humanism in the education system. And again, I will say, folks, if you have public school teachers that are friends, encourage them to get out of the NEA. What's happened? Satan's got these folks thinking, man, you got money, you got power, you're just about there. You can be like God. He's lied to them. Evolution is the foundation for Nazism. Mussolini and Hitler and Joseph Stalin and all these dictators, even though they fought on opposite sides of this war, they had the same philosophy that people are expendable. Mussolini, the communist, the dictator in Italy, not communist, but fascist, Mussolini thought the Italians were inferior because, or thought they were superior, and thought the Ethiopians were inferior because the Ethiopians were black. They went down and slaughtered the Ethiopians because they were black. Hitler was a strong believer in evolution theory. Hitler believed the Germans were the superior race that deserved to rule the world. Hitler wrote this book, Mein Kampf. In this book, Hitler talked about higher races, lower peoples. He said, nature does not desire the mating of weaker with stronger individuals. Even less does she desire the blending of a higher with a lower race. Who's a lower race, Adolf? Hitler offered to send the Jews, who he thought were the lowest race. He said, I'll send them to anybody that'll take them. I'll give them to you on luxury ships. Who wants them? Did you know America closed their doors to the Jews in 1938 and refused to let the Jews come over here? Because our leaders thought they were inferior species. I was in New Hampshire speaking. I went to Keene State University, to the Keene State University Library. And there they've got a whole bunch of books about Hitler and the Holocaust. A whole section of the library just about Hitler. And I like to read I read lots of stuff about Hitler. So I went and talked to the librarian, and I said, sir, can you tell me, why did Hitler kill the Jews? Why not somebody else? Well, he killed a lot of people, but why did he hate the Jews so bad? He said, well, Hitler had a list he was going on. I said, sir, I'd like to see that list. Here's Hitler's hit list, folks. Hitler thought the Nordic, Norwegian, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, were close to pure Aryan. That was the supreme race, he thought. Did you catch all that? Blonde hair, blue eye, Norwegian, går det står det till idag. Hitler thought the Norwegian Nordics were the supreme race. They're the top. Under them was the Germans with brown hair and blue eyes, or less desirable brown-eyed. He thought they were predominantly Aryan. He said the Mediterraneans were slightly Aryan. The Slavics were half Aryan, half ape. The Orientals, you know, Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, they are slightly ape. He said the black Africans are predominantly ape. The Jews are close to pure ape. That's what they taught their folks. So Hitler's guards were killing the Jews thinking they were doing humanity a favor by eliminating the inferiors. If they would have killed all the Jews, guess who would have been next? Black people. Hitler hated black people. Does anybody know where the Olympics were held in 1936? Berlin, Germany. Does anybody know who won the most gold medals? Jesse Owens, the black American athlete. Woo! Hitler was so angry, he stormed out of the stadium. He said, this is unfair to make my men race against this animal. See, that goes back to his philosophy, back to his crooked, twisted thinking, back to his belief in evolution. If he'd have read his Bible, he'd have found in Acts chapter 17, all nations are of one blood. And we all come from Noah, folks. And before that, we all come from Adam, and there's no reason to be a racist. And if you'll send a missionary across the ocean to win a black man to Christ, and you won't walk across the street to win a black man to Christ, you are a hypocrite. Don't tell me you love God. You don't have the foggiest idea what that's talking about. One of the Jewish prisoners who survived the Holocaust said, there is a difference between those who look upon their fellow human beings as common creatures of a common creator and those who look upon them as a conglomerate of biologicals and chemicals. Hey, is man just a bunch of chemicals put together? I mean, if we're here by evolution, that's what we are, folks. So Hitler built these camps. I was just in Flossburg a few months ago. Did your husband come tonight from Germany? Okay. He was raised over there. He was one of Hitler's youth, up to 10 years old, wasn't he? I talked to a preacher up in Wisconsin. He came to me and he said, Dr. Hovind, you are so right. He said, Hitler indoctrinated the young people. He said, I was involved in Hitler's youth. He said, the first thing we were taught when we went to school, first thing we were taught was evolution, to show us that we are the superior race. So they started killing these inferior species, you know, lock them up. If they get in trouble, just even if you just feel like it, execute them. What happened to the Jews, folks, you won't understand until you see how it ties in with the philosophy of evolution. How can one human do that to another human? Well, they thought they were inferior. No different than pulling weeds out of your garden. If you think they're human weeds, well, then you eliminate them. I stood at that platform where Hitler's standing in this picture just a few months ago, there in Nuremberg. Hitler had these massive rallies. He would cram the people in. The purpose was to make the individual feel small and the cause feel great. So the individual is willing to die for the cause. That's exactly what's happening with the environmental movement today. They're trying to get your kids in school to feel like, oh, you got to save the planet. Save Mother Earth. The cause is so great. You're expendable. Your neighbors are expendable, but the cause. Same type mentality, folks. Hitler started working on the young people. He always worked on the youth. He understood. Get the youth. He said, let me control the textbooks and I'll control the state. He wasn't worried about what the old folks thought. One old man said, you're never going to get me. He said, I don't need you. I've already got your children. You'll pass away. I've already got your children. But Hitler tried to make everybody think he was a Christian. He wasn't. He hid behind the cross. That's what he did. This book by Marvin Lutzer is a great book on Hitler's cross. Here's a propaganda picture sent all over Germany with Hitler walking out of a church with a cross above his head. Everybody said, oh, the Fuhrer, he's such a wonderful Christian. They had Nazi baptisms. You got baptized into Nazism. They had Nazi altars. A lot of folks don't know about that. A man in Skokie, Illinois, several years ago, told the authorities, the police, he picked a man out of the phone book and shot him. He said, why? He said, well, this guy was a plastic surgeon. These plastic surgeons are making blue-tinted contact lenses, and they're diluting the Aryan beauty. Folks, if you think Nazism is dead, you better read your paper a little more carefully. The idea that one race is superior to the others comes from this idea of evolution. It doesn't come from God. We're all made from the same dirt, folks. The wrath of heaven is going to be revealed one of these days. It's coming soon. God showed them. He's the creator of the world. The creation is clearly seen. They are without excuse. There's no excuse to not accept Christ as your Savior. I want to show you some more things of how this philosophy has influenced the world in the next session. And then tell you some practical steps of what we ought to be doing. Next session, we're going to talk about the New World Order, some of the executive orders that have been passed, and how there are folks who want to destroy this country, folks. It's going to be a little politically incorrect. You might not want to stay for that one. Now, you're welcome to go home if you like. We're going to cover some things that might scare you. But we're going to tell you some practical steps of what we ought to be doing now. What should we do? Coming up next.